In this video, I'm going to talk to you about in-the-hoop embroidery designs. In-the-hoop designs basically mean you stay within the hoop that you're using. So you never really unhoop anything, you just build onto the design by adding layers. Some of you may have actually seen some really cute embroidered vinyl key fob things. That's in the hoop, and those tend to be pretty simple. But what if you're like me and you're a bag maker, and sometimes you want some low-hanging fruit, something you can sell for like 20 bucks, but you need to make a buttload of them because you know if you sell it for 20 bucks, they're just gonna go flying right out of the basket. So what about minimalist wallets? Well, the trouble with wallets is you're still gonna have to sit down and sew it, and doing that in bulk can oftentimes take you away from other projects you could be working on. So if you have a really nice minimalist design, you can do it all in the hoop and in bulk, especially when you have giant hoops like this mighty hoop that's 13 by 16. That's freedom units. And while I could actually make one of these files myself, I do like to show love toward other creators. That's why I'm going to be using the minimalist wallet design by Christie's Designs. I'll leave a link in the description of the video below to where you can purchase this off of Etsy. I'll admit I'm rage promoting this pattern because I love it, and I also have a deep-rooted hatred for 4-star reviews on Etsy that are basically complaints for their inability to read descriptions. When something tells you you do this in vinyl, cork, or leather, it doesn't mean you go complaining about having fraying fabric because you're an idiot and decided to use quilting cotton. So just keep that in mind next time you go to Etsy and start reading descriptions for hardworking designers such as myself or Christie. Now I'll step off of the soapbox and get started in explaining the whole idea behind in-the-hoop designs. First off, like I said, it's all done with embroidery. You essentially layer step upon step. The first step is always going to be some kind of tack down to give you an idea of where you're supposed to place your materials. The key factor to this isn't necessarily like the hoop or anything like that. It's using tearaway. Tearaway stabilizer implies that it tears. The reason you want to use a tearaway stabilizer is because the edges are going to be raw in most of these cases. Although I will say there are some really neat and cute zippered pouches that are done completely in the hoop with fabrics. I mean, like woven fabrics, not, you know, vinyl. The kind of tearaway that I recommend is actually going to be a medium weight. There's always going to be some variation of a light, a medium, or a heavy weight for stabilizers, both in cutaway and in tearaway. The reason you don't want to use something that's basically super light is because the perforation that's going to happen with the tack down and then all of the other stitches could cause it to rip and tear earlier than necessary. The other thing you're going to want is a fresh can of quilt basting spray, which is ironic because quilters hate this stuff. Super sticky, never gets off of anything. If you don't want to use the basting spray, you can just use masking tape. I just feel a little safer sometimes when I'm doing things in bulk instead of like just a one-off thing to use the basting spray. That ensures it's not going to go anywhere. But I will say this is mostly because I have an industrial-sized dedicated multi-needle embroidery machine that has a free arm. If you're using a single needle domestic machine that's kind of like sewing in combination with embroidery, you have a flatbed and you probably don't have to worry about the basting spray, but you're going to want to take the crap out of it. Now let's talk about the in-the-hoop designs themselves. When you get the design and you download it, typically it's just going to be the one item. So you need to be able to take that object and duplicate it, then order it by color. The reason I say that because the way that you do things in stages, layer by layer, and eventually build up to the final product is by inserting a pause and a frame out by the thread color. So for example, in this file, what we're going to be doing is the first color is red, and that's just going to be the outline so that I know about where I need to place the fabric that I want to use for the card slots on the inside. It's going to stitch that outline, stop, not move to the next color that I have in my sequence, and then pull the frame out. This is also known as like an applique mode. It makes it a lot easier to access everything. Now in some cases, you won't have to do this. With this particular pattern, I need to actually use an X-Acto knife to cut away the center section along the stitches that it makes. This honestly is going to make it much easier for me to line up things and ensure that I have everything in the right spot instead of pre-cutting the card slots and hoping I fit them in the right areas. So it's a little bit of an extra step, but it's not too overbearing. If anything, it's easier than pre-cutting all of those little card slots, hoping I get it right, top stitching them, and then kind of like I don't know, manhandling them and gluing them down for the final stitches. Sorry, tack down, whatever. You'll rinse and repeat this for however many colors there are coded into the design. This design has 3 colors. Now, out of respect for the pattern designer, I'm not going to show you the file. The only modification that I made was to take the one file and replicate it so that I have 4 in one hoop. So basically, I'll be making 4 wallets with one hoop. Yay, productivity! Oh, and one other tiny modification that I made was to add like a little 3mm hole on either side so I could insert cam snaps. Because for me, I do like to have those little minimalist wallets close shut. Otherwise, they can be a little weird. If you want to skip that though, you can totally do that. The fabric I'm going to be using is this really nice cork from Sally Tomato. They're pretty much the only store I trust to get cork from. This would be why. I have no interfacing on this, and I am tugging on all of this material and it is not ripping. However, if you don't feel comfortable with that, you can absolutely add a layer of interfacing to it. Just make sure it's a nice looking interfacing because it will show in the areas that are going to be between the 2 pockets. Now I'll just hoop my stabilizer, work my way down to the workshop, and take you through the process. One quick thing before we head down to the workshop, make sure that your stabilizer is super tight. Tight like a toiga. If it's loosey-goosey in here, then nothing's gonna line up correctly, and lots of mistakes will be made. So everyone's machine is going to be varied on how it handles this, but essentially the way that you want to handle the whole like stopping between colors thing, if you have a multi-needle machine like my Ricoma MT1501, is to select the colors where you want to have stops after those colors complete and add the pause. I've also selected the frame out button over here. It's got an F on it and a little illustration of the frame pushing up. That's because it'll pull the frame out so it's easier to trim things. That's a helpful setting for applique, just in general. And here I have everything set up and ready to go. One safety thing that I like to do before I start stitching absolutely anything out with my embroidery machine is to use the frame button. This is going to let me check to make sure that the needle isn't going to hit the edge of any of my frame in the process, because that can cause a lot of timing issues. The first step for In the Hoop projects is to stitch out placement guides. This is a basting stitch that shows you where you need to place your fabric. If you've done applique embroidery before, this is the exact same thing. Now I have those guidelines so I can see where I need to place the cork. I've arranged this such that I can just do one giant rectangle across here. That's less waste and a lot more efficient. Now I like to trigger my quilting friends by using Fast Tack Spray Away. But really, if you just want to, you don't have to use any kind of basting spray with this. You could tape it. I'm gonna let it resume, and this time it's going to basically put the top stitches on where the areas of the pocket are gonna be near the top. It might be a little hard to see, but all that step did was basically put down the outline of where the edges of the card slots are gonna be. This being the center section. That's what you have to cut away, specifically with this pattern. Here's what it looks like after I've cut out the space in between the card slot ends using an X-Acto knife. Now for the final stitch, it's basically gonna do the top stitch all the way around all 4 of these wallets. This is the same kind of thing that you would have happen with any of your In the Hoop projects. Some projects want you to basically sandwich things by putting the fabric right side down on top, and others, like this and key fobs, want you to basically tape this or baste it on the underside. So for a wallet, if you're thinking correctly, this needs to be your exterior. So we're gonna basically take this and tape it on the underside so that the wrong side is facing out in these holes. I do think it's easier to go ahead and just spray baste the backing, because if you spray baste the fabric itself, then the center section that's gonna be exposed is gonna have a lot of stickiness to it. Note that if you do happen to get some of that gooey, nasty, quilty, basty spray stuff on your frame, you can remove it with Goo Gone later. And because I'm extra paranoid, I went around the edges with painter's tape. The super important thing is when you're placing down the fabric on the underside, don't push on it. Gently touch it and smooth it out, but if you push, you can actually make that stabilizer stretch out a bit, or worse, it'll rip. Now you can go ahead and put the hoop back onto the machine right side up. And just for your reference, this is what it's going to look like after you set it back on the machine. Now you can press start to resume with that last color, which with this particular pattern is going to be the final tack down. Okay, it's all done. Let's take this baby upstairs and I'll show you how to clean it up. So here's the finished result, and this is going to give me 4 minimalist wallets. 4 wallets in what basically was less than 10 minutes. Heck, I would even go out to say it was probably less than 5 minutes. It just feels longer when I'm recording it. Now all I have to do is cut them out. Just follow that outer edge and cut that as closely as you can get it to the stitching. I'm using a rotary cutter for the straight edges, but after each wallet is cut out, I'm going to trim the rounded corners with a smaller, more accurate pair of scissors. If you use a large pair of scissors, you're basically gonna have like this really chunky looking curve, and no one wants that. Okay, now I have 4 wallets. But you might be thinking, but kittens, the edges are raw. And while maybe not necessarily a big problem for something like cork, it does look kind of ugly with vinyl. There's a couple of different ways that you can handle this. None of them are required. It's purely a matter of taste. If you're using 100% genuine leather, or cork in this case, you can file down the edges and burnish them. Burnishing with an edge tool lets you basically smooth out those edges. It's a great way to add a bit of a finish while leaving the natural look. You use the burnishing tool with burnishing gum, like this one here, and a simple nail file or some low grit, maybe 400 grit sandpaper just to sand the edges down. This is to make sure that they are both scruffed up in order to accept all of the goodness you're going to give it with the burnishing gum, but also to even out the edges if there are little burrs hanging out. Another alternative is to use edge coat. Edge coat comes in all different colors. I presently only have black and white, which is kind of limiting now that I think about it. So I'm gonna put a pin in that and go buy myself some natural brown or whatever color. You basically apply edge coat by going around the edges that you have either burnished already to prepare or just sanded. When I'm doing stuff with like vinyl, I just sand it down and then I edge coat it. You just have to use the little tool that I'm showing off here. It's just a little aluminum thing with a spiky end. It holds enough of the edge coat that you can just roll it around the edge, basically distribute it, and make it look pretty awesome. 2 or 3 coats is usually necessary. So expect to basically apply a layer of edge coat, let it dry completely, and then apply a 2nd or 3rd coat later. But again, like I said, not necessarily required. And I know at the very beginning of the video I said I made one modification to the file, which was basically to add little markings so I could put some cam snaps in. I don't think they're really necessary. Since we're not using multiple layers of cork or vinyl, it folds in half pretty easily. Unless you overstuff it, it's not gonna pop open. In fact, if you want to, you can just fold it in half and set it under a few heavy books, and it'll take care of the problem itself. Especially if it's a natural material like cork or leather, you can spray it with a bit of water. If you put it under your pillow, you get money, right? That's right? You get like, it's like the wallet fairy. I need to try that. I think the only thing that I would change, and it may have been this way in the instructions, is to ensure that I do the card slots on the underside first, not top side. The reason for that is because the bobbin thread is showing on the outside as the top stitch. I don't mind that too much, it matches, but if it was a darker fabric and it didn't really kind of vibe with the pattern, that would suck. Just note that if you do happen to wind a bobbin with one of your like multi-needle machines and then use that bobbin in the bobbin case, you might need to have a 2nd bobbin case so that you can maybe loosen the tension a bit. I only say that because typically bobbin thread is 60 weight, whereas upper thread for embroidery is 40 weight. That will make a difference when it comes to your tensions. If you do go that route, make sure you clearly label your bobbin cases. If you're using a domestic sewing machine that's basically sewing and embroidery combination, don't do that. Just tweak the upper tension. Touching the tension of the bobbin case on a domestic sewing machine isn't something you should ever do. Ask me how I know. I hope this video helped clear up any misunderstandings about in the hoop embroidery. I'm going to leave some helpful links down in the description below. Of course, the first one being to the pattern that I used by Christie's Designs on Etsy. This is a really quick and easy project to do, and you can stack them up to basically fill up a hoop and do 4 or even more. As in, I probably could have gotten really plucky and used the sash hoop. and I don't even want to know how many of these I would have ended up with. As always, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel to give me all of the attention that I crave, because I need to fill that void where my soul used to exist. Oh, and leave comments. I love comments. Bye!